The forest stood still, a veil of silence hung heavy, broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to watch. Their branches, twisted like skeletal fingers, reached out as if to claim any who dared to enter. This was no ordinary forest. This was a place of shadows and secrets. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices low, their eyes wide with terror. The haunted forest, whispering woods. The names varied, but the stories remained the same. Stories of those who ventured in and were never seen again. Legends spoke of settlers seeking a new life, drawn by the promise of untamed wilderness. The forest welcomed them, offered shelter and sustenance, but the forest demanded respect, demanded sacrifice. The settlers took without giving, and the forest grew angry. Settlers began to disappear. Whispers followed them into the night. The forest had claimed them, leaving only silence and fear. For generations, the stories had been told, whispered around flickering campfires, passed down from parent to child. Each telling added a new layer of fear. The forest, they said, was never truly silent. The wind carried whispers through the trees, whispers that spoke of the lost souls claimed by the woods, whispers that promised a similar fate to those who ventured within. They knew that the whispers were real. The old tavern buzzed with a nervous energy. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and anticipation. 4 friends huddled around a table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. Jake, the leader, traced the rim of his mug. Mia leaned across the table, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" Tom scoffed, his voice loud in the sudden hush. Lisa, quiet and watchful, nodded in agreement. Jake met their gazes, his own steady and unwavering. He felt a thrill course through him, a heady mix of fear and excitement. He knew the risks, he had heard the whispers, but something drew him to the forest, a siren call he couldn't ignore. "There's only one way to find out," he said, his voice low and resolute. He pushed back his chair, his eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. "We face our fears head-on, we venture into the heart of the unknown." The others exchanged nervous glances, their laughter fading into a tense silence. They knew the stories, they had felt the weight of the forest's gaze upon them, but something in Jake's voice, a quiet confidence that brooked no argument, spurred them on. The forest welcomed them with a suffocating silence. Sunlight, filtered through the dense canopy, painted the forest floor in a mosaic of light and shadow. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Jake led the way, his footsteps echoing softly on the soft earth. He could feel the weight of their eyes on his back, their breaths shallow and quick. A shiver ran down his spine, but he pushed it aside, forcing a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "See," he said, his voice artificially loud in the stillness. "Nothing to be afraid of, just a walk in the woods." His words hung in the air, a hollow reassurance in the face of the forest's oppressive silence. As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees, gnarled and ancient, loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to form a suffocating canopy. The air grew colder, the scent of decay stronger, a cloying sweetness that clung to their throats. Mia shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "It's getting cold," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustle of leaves beneath their feet. And dark. The sunlight, once dappled and bright, was now a pale ghost struggling to penetrate the dense foliage. Jake, sensing her unease, forced a smile. "Don't worry," he said, his voice strained. "We'll set up camp soon, build a fire, it'll be fine." A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, sending a shiver through the branches. Leaves rained down around them, dry and brittle, like the whispers of ghosts. The forest, once eerily silent, was now alive with sound, a chorus of creaks and groans that set their teeth on edge. Tom, his face pale beneath his bravado, stopped abruptly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. "What was that?" Lisa, her gaze fixed on the tangled undergrowth, shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, but it sounded close. The forest pressed in, a suffocating presence. The weight of its gaze settled on their shoulders, heavy and cold. Footsteps, once light and carefree, grew heavy, each step an effort. Jake fought against the urge to turn back. The forest held a strange allure, a dangerous beauty that both terrified and fascinated him. His eyes darted to the shadows that danced at the edge of his vision, his mind conjuring images from the whispered tales. He glanced back at his friends, their faces pale in the fading light. Fear, raw and primal, flickered in their eyes. He tried to smile, to offer a reassuring word, but the forest stole his voice, leaving only a hollow silence. The wind picked up, swirling around them like a living thing. It whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and cold. The air grew heavy, thick with a strange energy that sent shivers down their spines. Mia stumbled, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "There, in the trees." Tom, his bravado fading with the light, shook his head, his voice tight with fear. "See what?" "There's nothing there." But his gaze darted nervously to the shadows, his words unconvincing even to himself. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the pounding of their hearts. The air grew colder, the scent of decay stronger, a cloying sweetness that clung to their throats like a shroud. Lisa, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, shivered. "I don't like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. "I want to go back." Jake hesitated, his gaze drawn to the depths of the woods. He could feel the forest watching them, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. He knew they should turn back, but something held him there, a strange compulsion he couldn't explain. Twilight bled into darkness. The forest floor, once a tapestry of light and shadow, was now a black abyss. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, seemed to press in, suffocating. They chose a clearing, a small island of space in the heart of the woods. The trees, gnarled and ancient, formed a silent circle around them, their branches intertwining overhead like skeletal fingers. Jake worked quickly, gathering wood, his movements sharp and precise. The crackle of the kindling, the burst of flame as the fire caught, offered a small measure of comfort, a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows that stretched and twisted, taking on monstrous forms. The friends huddled close, their faces drawn and pale in the firelight. The silence, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees, pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Tom shifted, his gaze darting nervously to the darkness beyond the firelight. "I need some air," he muttered, his voice tight with a tension he couldn't quite conceal. He didn't wait for a response. He rose, his movements jerky and uncertain, and walked towards the edge of the clearing, disappearing into the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence, once broken by Tom's nervous energy, now felt heavy, oppressive. The crackling of the fire, the soft whisper of the wind, only served to amplify the absence of their friend's voice. Mia hugged her knees to her chest, her gaze fixed on the spot where Tom had vanished. "He's been gone a while," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Lisa, her eyes wide with a growing fear, nodded. "Maybe we should go look for him," she suggested, her voice thin and reedy in the stillness. Something might have happened. Jake felt a knot of unease tighten in his gut. He scanned the impenetrable darkness beyond the firelight, his heart pounding against his ribs. The forest held its breath, the silence pressing in, heavy and expectant. "Tom!" he called out, his voice strained, tight with a fear he couldn't suppress. "Tom, where are you?" The only response was the whisper of the wind through the trees, a mournful sigh that seemed to mock his fear. The forest offered no answers, only a silence that spoke volumes. Panic coiled in Jake's stomach, cold and tight. He fought to keep his breathing even, his voice steady. "We stick together," he said, his words sharp, clipped. "No one goes anywhere alone." Mia and Lisa, their faces pale in the firelight, nodded silently. Fear, raw and primal, flickered in their eyes, reflecting the flickering flames. They rose, their movements hesitant, their gazes darting nervously to the impenetrable darkness beyond the firelight. Jake led the way, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the trees. The forest floor, littered with fallen branches and decaying leaves, seemed to writhe beneath their feet, a living carpet of shadows and secrets. The wind moaned through the trees, carrying with it a symphony of unsettling sounds. Branches creaked, leaves rustled, and unseen creatures scurried through the undergrowth. And beneath it all, a low, constant murmur like whispers on the wind. Mia shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "It sounds like voices." Jake strained to listen, his heart pounding against his ribs. The whispers were there, faint but distinct, weaving in and out of the wind's mournful song. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, whispering secrets he couldn't quite grasp. They pressed on, deeper into the heart of the woods. The trees closed in around them, their branches intertwining overhead to form a suffocating canopy. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a cloying sweetness that clung to their throats like a shroud. Lisa stumbled, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to go back." Jake reached out, his hand closing over her arm. "We'll find him," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his own heart. "We have to keep going." The forest seemed to tighten its grip, the darkness pressing in, suffocating. The path, if they had ever been on one, had vanished, swallowed by the undergrowth. They were lost, hopelessly, terrifyingly lost. And then a flicker of light, faint, distant but unmistakable. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, fluttered in Jake's chest. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing his flashlight towards the light. "Over there!" The light led them deeper, beckoning them forward with a cruel promise. A clearing emerged, bathed in an ethereal glow. In the center, a figure. Tom, his back to them, his shoulders slumped. "Tom!" he shouted, rushing forward. "We found you!" But as they drew closer, a cold dread gripped their hearts. Tom didn't turn. He didn't move. His face, once filled with youthful energy, was now a mask of horror. And then he was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a lingering chill and the echo of their own fear. The forest had claimed him, body and soul. It had taken its due, and it would be back for more.